This is your last chance. After this...
Or should we not follow the advice of the galactically stupid?
That is a nice boulder.
Loaded for speed! Go!
Ladies and gentlemen, coming to you pre-recorded from two undersized apartments in New York City, it's Revenge of the Film Nerds.
There, we're in a tight spot.
I hate when people talk during the movie.
With your hosts, Black Crystal.
I'm not bad. I'm just drawn that way.
And Jack Manley.
What we've got here is failure to communicate.
A podcast for nerds by nerds.
Oh, you betcha, yeah.
Failure is not an option.
And now, here are your hosts, Black Crystal and Jack Manley.
Hello, and welcome everybody to another amazing episode of Revenge of the Film Nerds. It's so good to be back, and I'm so excited to be here with you all, and especially to be here with my amazing co-host, Jack Manley. How are you doing, Jack? I missed you.
Welcome to 2023. I am excited to be jumping into what is the end of season 2, but I think we've got some great films lined up in January for people to hear all about. So I'm excited to get into it.
Oh yeah, listen, when we say, go big or go home, we do just that. And we're going to end with a bang, and we have some big bangers to bring this season out to a close, and we're going to do it right. So I'm very excited to see what 2023 has in store for the film nerds.
I am too, but I have to say, it's an interesting kind of irony this week because we closed out 2022, the old year, with a fairly new film in Tick, Tick, Boom, and now we are starting the new year of 2023 with the oldest film we have covered so far.
Yes, I am quite literally very excited for the conversation this evening, and I surprised myself about it. So we're going to be covering an oldie, and by oldie, I mean it's still in black and white.
An oldie, but a quintessential classic, and one of the most landmark films ever made, period, irrespective of genre. Because we are going to be talking about John Huston's 1941 masterpiece, The Maltese Falcon. Now, BK, I think you know why I'm excited, but it was your first viewing of this. I've seen this a couple of times, so how did this strike you? We've jumped into noir before, but this was a real initiation.
Yeah, this film, I mean, we saw The Third Man, and that was kind of I feel like my first real dive into true noir. And that slow walked you in, right? It kind of laid the pieces in what I saw as a very stereotypical thing to expect of like Private Eye, but it hit me with a lot of twists. And I kind of got that ready in my purse, in my pocket, walking into the Maltese Falcon. And I think what's so awesome about this film is it throws you in it. It throws you all up in the story from rip. And it is very much everything I had hoped for something that you could watch when you think of noir. I think of this film now, Jack. Look what you've done to me.
I mean, that's kind of the point, because it really is the first true noir. It is considered widely to be the first great detective story ever on film, and it has a story that is timeless. The beautiful woman shows up at the detective's office and offers him a mystery. The detective's partner gets shot. He has to unravel the mystery while he gets into a tangled web of lies and deception that centers around this Maltese Falcon, an artifact of immeasurable value that was lost in a pirate raid in the 16th century. And so the whole story is about this detective, Sam Spade, this iconic character in early American cinema, solving the case to get his hands on the Falcon first, while having to allay suspicions that he murdered his partner. And it's a phenomenal little mystery that ropes you in, because even 81 years on from its creation, it's something that you just find very visceral, very emotionally connected. And I think that's why people come back to it.
Yeah, I definitely feel like it grips you early on, and the plot is part of it, but really it's a combination of the performances and the atmosphere that this film really makes. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I have to be honest. When you said Maltese Falcon, I was like, "Are we gonna be watching something about birds?" Like, I had to be serious. I was like, Jack, what in God's name? 1940? What? A Falcon? Is it airplanes? What is this? Around the World in 80 Days? Like, I assumed the worst, and I walked in there getting something very unexpectedly pleasant. And you know me, y'all. I love learning where references come. Like, I am that. I am like, give me the media. I want to know where the references come. Why are things the way they are? And the Maltese Falcon is so quintessential. It really sets up a lot of tropes and character types that I feel like I should have known came from something and had no idea they came from this.
And that's really the cool thing about this film, honestly, is that the Maltese Falcon is the literal foundation for one of the most important genres, I'll say it again, that has ever existed in film history, film noir. It is the moment in time where the visuals and the storytelling style of German Expressionism came to American audiences. It's really the first time we'd ever seen the art of film move forward like that as a force in America. I mean, other examples of this art had existed before, but this is the film that made it a phenomenon. And I think film noir is a truly unique and vitally important cultural force in both film history and American history. You know, it allowed us to represent people as more than archetypes. It lets characters be fallible. You get to see these people on screen, and the Maltese Falcon is deeply flawed, game-playing nihilists who live by their next move or their next big score. And people's innate attraction to darkness, I think, BK, is what attracts them to the telling of these stories, and the telling of this one in particular. You see how audiences responded dramatically to seeing the seedy underbelly of American life made bare, furthermore, by the fact that film noir was the popular genre of the 40s and early 50s. And I think, BK, honestly, that's why I use this as an entry point into classic film. It's such a potent portrait of what attracts us to the darker side of human nature.
I'm so glad you laid it out that way, because for me, why I liked it, contrary to my normal preferences, y'all all know I can't stand a slow burn. But I guess I have a patience, or I've developed a tolerance for these stories, especially when it comes to noir, because it's really an experience of a film. It's more than just its writing. It's an overall amazing package that is rooted with emotion and real characters. Like you said, often I feel like when we think of theater or old form art, it is very expressive and a lot of grandiose characters. And noir does a great kind of an ode to classic theater, but puts a very modern and realistic, humanistic approach to its characters in the way that they present them. But that's just like my interpretation. I've only seen like 2 films, Jack. So I'm curious how you feel about that when you mention things about like character types and archetypes and kind of the story itself. I know we're getting ahead of it, but it's really what drew me into the film.
I think that's emblematic of film noir are the strong performances in films like the ones that you see in The Maltese Falcon. And I think part of that is because more than just being this landmark genre, remember, film noir came into vogue while Hollywood was dealing with the motion picture production code from 1934 to 1968 that placed firm morality standards on what could and could not be shown to audiences. So a lot of what actors and a lot of what storytellers had to do in this period was use their creativity and their guile to bring mature subjects to the screen in defiance of these morality standards and kind of start sneaking things over the line. And in part, it's interesting because the work of the performers has to intimate so much, but so does the script. And the writing of this story was crucial because issues had to be finessed or cleverly tucked into the conversations in order for them to actually ever see the light of day. And it gave a new generation of audiences an uncanny credit for intelligence and trusted them to take mature content in on the screen in a way that they had never previously done so without it being graphic pre-code filmmaking. And so I think that it's a really, really interesting exercise in those traditions.
Yeah, I was going to say all these limitations from this production code. I'm assuming that's worse than the ratings E for everyone. It really breeds creativity, I would have to think.
Ultimately, BK, this story is so well crafted because it came from, at its inception, an author that had an incredibly curtailed and well crafted life that he had to kind of resurrect from coming off the rails a little bit when he was a young man.
You're telling me this is a novel? I should have known. Like, I feel like an idiot for not thinking that it had source material, Jack. I feel like we've talked about these pulp writings before many a time. I'm starting to feel a trend here where people had to be creative to write these stories that were so quick to kind of captivate these readers that had a limited time to consume it.
Well, it does come from that very strong pulp tradition. You're right to point that out. And yeah, we do seem to have a little bit of a trend when it comes to drawing inspiration from these sources. But much like Maltese Falcon being the definitive noir film, it comes from what was widely described as the definitive detective novel from the definitive mystery author of the pulp era, one Dashiell Hammett. Now, Hammett had a unique perspective as a writer because after his sort of early life went off the rails, he dropped out of formal education to run the family business. He jumped into the world at age 19 of the Pinkerton Detective Agency. So his storytelling ultimately came from this very strong root in knowing the world of these private eyes and knowing their mannerisms and knowing how they wanted to be portrayed. And his real world experiences really are what undergird this story. From everything to the detective's code, Humphrey Bogart's aloofness in the role of Sam Spade and his detachment, to the setting of San Francisco, which is where he settled after being a Pinkerton and where he worked on his novels. So everything that he did and everything that is exacting about this novel and about this script comes from a man who formed his life and formed his perspective on the world in a very exacting world of his own.
Wow, I had no idea. I'm like taking this all in. This is like this is a lot for me. Because I get excited when I find out that like the writers or the authors or creators, they put their life into their work. They put their real life experience into that. I love seeing that translation. So that is awesome. This is lining up. Oh my gosh.
And he had established at this time a really strong relationship in his first works with the preeminent pulp periodical Black Mask, which was well noted for publishing some of the greatest pulp work of the time, but was struggling in this period. And he kind of became the publisher's darling at this time, and they were really the ones who got his short story work out there. And it is in this environment where, looking for his next great story in 1928, he begins to write The Maltese Falcon, once again based on his own experiences. But even then, this one had a little bit more of a personal touch to it than his other stories did, BK.
I'm sorry. I'm sitting here enraptured, quite literally. I guess my brain is processing, right? Hear me out, y'all. BK brain on slow motion. I'm thinking of just all of the times I've seen typical detectives, even the stuff that's coming out now, like things like I'm finding out that are books like Glass Onion and what is it, Death on the Nile, and like that's like my entry point to detective works and things like that. Like I didn't really read books, not books about this. So to think about all those tropes and to think about the Maltese Falcon, the novel being the book of the time, I'm like, holy cow. So we are watching the creation of these new archetypes in a sense. Is that weird or wrong for me to say?
I think that's correct. And it's interesting that he chose to personalize it as much as he did by, from everything from basing Gutman and Joel Cairo on real people that he encountered when he was working as a Pinkerton to nailing down Sam Spade's detective code. But what he did in the story that was different is he gave the main character, Sam Spade, an actual name and an actual identity. Before then, Hammett had only written his detective stories about the quote-unquote continental op, a detective who always spoke in the first person and never gave a name. The stories that he had written previously were not really about the detective as the character, but rather about the unfolding of the mystery and the figuring it out nature of the whodunits that he would set up. But Sam Spade, as Hammett put it, was a character who had no original. He is a dream man in the sense that he is what most of the private detectives I worked with would like to have been, and in their cockier moments thought they approached. So he really did, when he released this in 5 parts in Black Mask in 1929, think this process out of putting his real life's work into the story, but also allowing a personal edge that let you see the detective's code and that detachment that these people live by as something that really affects the character, rather than it being just something that is an unspoken truth of the mystery playing out. And I find that to be a really key personal touch that I think helped set this book off and make it the detective novel, as you put it.
Yeah, I feel like maybe that's why I like it so much, because some of the best detective stories are really it's about the code. Like I'm laughing because you're saying things very clinically in a sense, and I'm like, I say it as a joke with my friends when we're talking about, having fun, or I'm improving and I'm like, I think I want to be a detective. I'm thinking of these things or these types of stories, the great gem, and we're going to get it, and really being like good at your job. And I feel like that's a dream in itself. I feel like that's something people really fantasize about. And in the realm of crime and detective world, that kind of seedy underbelly you mentioned earlier, those are all fantasies I feel like weren't really played into at the time or even explored with any grain of realism. And I'm curious to actually like kind of read the novel now, if you're telling me that it's pretty much the same thing as the film.
It's very, very close, but it didn't get to that form originally because BK, obviously, when this is released as a full novel in 1930, it had already been blowing up the pages of Black Mask as a serialized story. But when the novel comes out, of course, as is tradition, the story gets optioned about immediately when Warner Brothers hears about it.
Oh, Warner Bros? Oh, no.
And BK, what would you say if I told you that this was the 3rd attempt to make the Maltese Falcon, and that Warner Brothers had already taken 2 cracks at it twice?
Whoa. So you mean to tell me the movie that we watched is not the first attempt at adapting the novel?
The first attempt came in 1931, the year after Warner Brothers optioned the book. And it was a pre-code detective drama starring Ricardo Cortez and Bibi Daniels. And while it stays true to a lot of the novel's dialogue, including the references within it to homosexuality and nudity, it largely plays up Spade's sexual exploits, and it was really released to kind of a middling response. And ultimately, it kind of fell victim to what a lot of pre-code films in the early 30s did, is filmmaking at this time was really very exploitative. You mentioned a lot of the tropes that are glorified or that had not yet been glorified at this time. When they started coming into film in stuff like the seminal gangster classic Scarface in the 1930s, it was all very blown up. It was about what film could get away with almost, more than it was about what you were seeing on the screen. And so this first version of Maltese Falcon was kind of a victim of that.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Like, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's one of those things where it's like the medium of film allows us to do things we can't do in normal life. So like, let's see how far we can push the envelope now that we're making movies, in a sense.
Exactly. It was kind of like what Jeff Goldblum says in Jurassic Park. You know, you were so caught up on whether or not you could that you didn't think about whether or not you should. And that's the way that a lot of these pre-code pictures were. And ultimately, it's why in 1935, when Warner Brothers wanted to re-release the film, it was denied by the Hayes office that oversaw adjudication of the production code over the fact that it was so full of lewd content. And so this forces Warner Brothers into making what turned out to be a very schlocky remake that was a almost B-level comedy called Satan Met a Lady, starring Bette Davis. And it changed up tons of elements of the novel and was really just almost slapstick. And it was a major flop, BK. Like, Bette Davis, who is one of the more astute voices in early Hollywood, flatly called it junk.
Wow, with such good source material, you would think it would be, I don't know, hard to make it that bad, but I guess I've seen some bad adaptations, so I shouldn't be saying anything.
I mean, the second one, Satan Met a Lady, is not really worth watching, but as a curiosity, you can still find the 1931 film under the name Dangerous Female. It was, though, illegal to screen it for 30 years due to the Hays Office. So it's an interesting progression, and it's clearly a property that in early Hollywood deserved a second chance, and funnily enough, it would fall into the hands of a director who was similarly looking for a second chance of their own.
Okay, so we finna talk about the directees, because, like, I feel like this film is done very well. It is done with attention, it's done with purpose. To me, it feels like work of a seasoned director. Like, this doesn't feel like someone's first film.
It doesn't feel like someone's first film, but what's mind-blowing is it is John Huston's directorial debut.
No way.
It absolutely is, and it's crazy because he comes to this after, in the early 30s in Hollywood, really kind of blowing his first chance as a scriptwriter.
Oh, man. I mean, coming into Hollywood, starting the game like that, and bombing on your first chance? I mean, we've heard similar sentiments before, but definitely leads for a path of complications. I really hope John's life ain't that bad. How bad is it, Jack? Tell me.
Well, it's equal parts kind of blessed and tragic because he came to Hollywood basically at his father's urging after he was struggling as a story writer in New York City. Hollywood was now making talkies, and there was a huge demand, obviously, for scriptwriters, adding dialogue to films that had never previously existed before. And while he received no assignments initially, when he moved to Universal, where his father was a signed star, he started developing a reputation for snappy dialogue and incisive writing, and even got to become director William Wyler's protege a little bit. So he was starting down that path to becoming a director, but he also had a very unfortunate reputation for being a severe drunk.
Oh, no, that's not good. I do know, though, like a lot of artists, it's one of those things. Sometimes creatives have those vices or things that kind of fuel them and keep them going. So it doesn't surprise me, unfortunately.
It doesn't surprise me either, especially when you're part of the Huston family, which is like this long-living dynasty of film. The pressures of being in that family are enormous, but the drinking is sadly what would take him out of Hollywood for a time, because in 1933, he would have 2 incidents of vehicular intoxication where he would get involved in car crashes. In one, he would seriously injure his girlfriend, Zita Johann, in an accident while driving intoxicated. And the same year, tragically, he was behind the wheel in an accident that took the life of Tosca Ruin, actor Raoul Ruin's wife. And this effectively ends his career. Even though he was cleared of wrongdoing by the coroner, he was blackballed in Hollywood and traumatized by the event. And for 4 years, in 34 to 37, he's living essentially as a drifter in London and Paris.
Oh, wow. I mean, yeah, that's got to do it to you. A traumatic event like that with notable figures is really going to take you out of the game. You're going to need space. You're going to need to go.
It wasn't even that. It was like a full stop of work. He was just despondent.
Really?
John, he didn't really go and write many scripts at this time. He was just very despondent and very broken by the things that had happened to him and by this blown first chance. But he did finally, thankfully, clean up his act a little bit. He still kept drinking, but he moderated it and he cleaned up his demons to the point where in 37, he was able to go back to Hollywood as a serious writer and got his second chance at Warner Brothers, where he resolved in secret to build up the cachet to eventually direct himself. And he penned some of the most important and major scripts of the era: Jezebel, Juarez, Dr. Ehrlich's Magic Bullet, and most famously, Sergeant York. And he would score Academy Award nominations for those latter 2 films. So after all of the turmoil in his life and the ways that he had to reconcile with himself, he eventually comes back and gains the admiration and respect of Hollywood as one of its best screenwriters.
Wow. I love that. He went off and did his own, self-searching, self-discovery, and really clean his act up there. And I can understand it. You got to disconnect sometimes, especially when there's a stain on your craft. Like, you've got to sometimes just step away, and coming back swinging. I mean, like, that is fire. So was it the 2 Academy Awards that got him the chance to make this film? Did they come to them and say, all right, let's go, babies, sign me up. You're going to Hollywood. Oh, wait, he was already there.
Well, not quite, because Huston had this great cachet as a preeminent screenwriter, but he still had this secret resolve that he wanted to direct, something that he had wanted to do ever since he had been a protege of William Wilder's. And so, right around this time in 1939 and 1940, he starts petitioning Warner Brothers and Jack Warner to be allowed to direct a film. And so finally, WB gives him an ultimatum that, fine, we'll allow your pestering to work, we will allow you to direct a film if your next script is a hit. And so he goes off and he writes what turns out to be an early example of film noir called High Sierra.
Ooh, High Sierra. I ain't never heard of that. About to add that to the list right now. Hold on.
It's an interesting watch, and director Raoul Walsh starts hitting at some of the expressionist visuals and some of the nihilistic tropes that would become standard in noir, but it was a smash hit, and it was enough of a hit that Huston's directing chair was all but assured. But not only that, BK, the other connection that this has to the Maltese Falcon is this turned out, did High Sierra, to be the breakout role for a career character actor named Humphrey Bogart.
Oh, that's the guy. That's like the main guy.
Yes, indeed. Sam Spade comes to you because of his work on set with Huston on High Sierra. And the two became close friends and drinking partners because they had a mutual admiration for each other that they learned about on set. Bogart, who was a lifetime reader and had really educated himself through being literate, admired Huston's raw natural talent for screenwriting, and Huston, who often found himself bored or uninterested in set, didn't find it intellectually stimulating, admired how Bogart was able to concentrate and focus in on his role. So they were starting to become a marriage made in heaven before Huston had ever put in the word action on his own.
Oh, that's so cool. I love it when directors have ties to certain actors and they kind of build that team for what you're to expect. You got to think about Quentin Tarantino. You've got Jordan Peele doing that with a lot of his actors now. Some of my favorites have those wheelhouse that they tap into. So to see it this early on is really cool for me.
I mean, yeah, on one hand, there is always like you worry about the nepotism aspect of things sometime, but at the same time, this is two people in Hollywood who had long storied, struggling careers before this point. And when they find each other, there was a real synchronicity to it. And because Huston had such an exacting vision, he really was ready to sink his teeth into the directing chair. And legend has it that in deciding on the project he was going to go with, a fellow director, Howard Hawks, reportedly suggested that he pick up this Maltese Falcon IP at Warner Brothers and give it another try.
Wow, that's interesting. Someone must have had their eyes on it. This Howard Hawks guy was like, I think now's the time. I see what you can do here. Maybe you're our guy.
Can I just say that every classic film historian who just heard you say this Howard Hawks guy had a minor heart attack?
I'm sorry, not sorry, y'all.
One day we will get some Howard Hawks on the podcast and I will correct this, folks. I can only apologize.
No, but for real though, this person's kind of smart, whoever this Hawks man may be. I'm curious. I want to know what made them think this is the time. I guess High Sierra was enough to see that they could work within the genre there, so that John could actually kind of write a script that was more serious, a little bit more real, a little bit more gritty. Those are my like thoughts from hearing the kind of like background that you've provided.
He really did have an exacting way of approaching this film and the directorial process that he wanted to go into. And in part, it's because he knew that the film was considered very small by Warner Brothers at the time. Jack Warner only gave the production $400,000 and only really gave him 6 weeks to shoot the entire thing. So John was adamant about planning out the film as much as possible due to the tight schedule and the limited budget. And when I say to the last detail, I mean to the last detail. he relied almost entirely, for one, on the dialogue in Hammett's novel and basically lifted it into his script. And he wrote the script in a way that you will never see done ever in Hollywood today, which is that he wrote it specifically with shot-for-shot instructions for each scene and setup. And he storyboarded every single scene and every single angle. The people who were on this production with him, they basically just had to show up to set and they had written out instructions for what they were doing that day.
Oh my God. I know what a storyboard looks like. Like, I'm freaking out right now. If I were to make that would be me. I would be that person.
There's something I appreciate about that too, as a very anal person and as somebody who came up learning about film really through the lens of somebody who's predisposed to being a producer and putting out fires. This is my dream director, honestly. Somebody who's like, I got everything covered thematically and critically. This is everything we're going to need. This is what's in every shot. You just help make it happen. Like, that's a godsend for a producer. And it's no wonder that when this film was shot on the Warner Brothers backlot in June and July of 1941, that they were able to stay on schedule and on budget for the entire film.
Wow. I mean, that's a success story, in my opinion, because we have heard some of the worst scenarios. So to be projected on budget, that's like angel for my ears.
And in kind of a genius move for a first-time director who was using this really exacting approach in what they were doing, Houston, except for some night shots, did the whole film shoot in sequence. And so it was of great benefit to the cast because they could treat it almost like a stage play. We're moving to the next scene. You know, and you've internalized what your previous emotions were, so you can stay in that mode while you're going to this next set piece. And it's really a bit of genius filmmaking from a storytelling perspective. But hand in hand with that, BK, is a genius bit of cinematography that we have to spotlight.
Okay, hit me. I'm trying to think, what we talking about here? We talking about visually how the film looks?
100%, because this is the film that really helped develop and define the film noir aesthetic, and it's the work of cinematographer Arthur Edison. He was really very strongly influenced. I mentioned it a couple times previously, but he was influenced very heavily by German Expressionism and the hard, low-key lighting and the arresting tilted angles, the low-angle shots that it would use to convey its story structure. And he had largely applied that in Hollywood to early monster films. He had been in that line of work and had been informed by the horror world. To bring those traditions over to dramatic filmmaking and that distinctive hard shadow style into what he's doing, he and Houston created an emphatic template and an iconic look for film noir that everything since has copied. So we have to give Arthur and his work some love for the way it defined the look of an entire genre.
Oh my goodness. So Arthur's the one who's pretty much responsible for like the whole vibe that I keep talking about. Like the aesthetic, the feeling that kind of grips you into the world is I'm blown away. I have a name now. Thank you, Arthur. Good looking out. I appreciate you.
I should say, not totally responsible. We should give some love to Fritz Lang and the German Expressionists for developing the style in the first place in the late 1910s and in the 1920s. But Edison is really the first strong American influence. So yeah, he does deserve those props.
So cool. Okay. I'm learning so much today. I knew this was going to be a good episode.
Just when you thought the podcast couldn't get any older.
I didn't know he was going this far back. You know what? I should have known. Again, I'm 2 for 2 for should have known what was gonna go down when we started talking about this film today.
I mean, it's a really blessed film in the way that it comes together, and because it's put together in such incisive detail, I want to go back to that point I made about the fact that it allows the actors to thrive in this, because I know when you and I were watching this film play out, BK, everything that we were reacting to strongly, or at least the strongest on the film, apart from the cinematography, was the acting performances and was just the sheer level of work being done by everybody in this film. So we've got to dig into it, because the performances really that are in this film are seminal and are at the core of how film noir developed.
Oh, yeah, that is definitely what kept me interested for sure. I feel like knowing also the circumstances for the production of the film, of being low budget, being very strict in the schedule, that provides for very meticulous, I would say, runs of scenes, continuous shots, performance. You've mentioned it too, theater. It really kind of shows a depiction of where acting was at the time. I mean, I bring this up because we were doing a watch party. It was impromptu in the Discord. We ended up watching Maltese Falcon again because I wanted to watch it again. And we watched Singing in the Rain. And I have to bring this up here because I need everyone to get mad at me. And Jack, you might roll over in your chair yet again, and everyone else who's angry at Hawks. I just have no context for timelines of history and knowing anything about like classical film. And I had seen Singing in the Rain growing up. I didn't know it was about the existence of talkies and about Hollywood and filmmaking at the time. And really watching that kind of got me super interested in the filmmaking of this era. And I gravitated immediately toward the acting and the characters that are there. They are so different and unique in the way they portray the characters and the way they are acting from what used to be the acting of the time. It's really, these films are coming out during the modern era of acting. What we still follow to this day is really what this film is a depiction of. And I think that's what got me so excited.
It's interesting that us doing that little palate cleanse by putting Singing in the Rain on after Maltese Falcon helped you appreciate the acting in film noir more. I wasn't expecting that. But what is it about the evolution of acting that you feel is encapsulated so well? I mean, as much as I know about film history and know little bits and pieces about the acting craft, I'm still basically a Philistine compared to you. So I'm curious what traditions you're referring to.
I'm worse with names, but Stanislavski is the name of the system or modern acting that was really starting to be used at the time, which is finding motivation for the characters. And when we talk about the source material and talk about the film and talk about how important the characters are to the story, to see that actors were kind of now reflecting that interpretation in their performance was kind of game changing. Before that, it really was a form of theater acting, a lot of grandiose expression, a lot of big gestures, and the way you had to talk because of, oh, do we know well, the audio situations of the time, all kind of melded and folded into a way or a system of how a lot of actors acted. And the Maltese Falcon is really an exemplary example of this because of, I think, of two specific characters. Obviously, Sam Spade, which we're going to have to get into. But I would love to start with the waifu of the flick. And that's Ruth, I believe. But she'd be changing her name. Am I wrong, Jack?
The infamous Miss O'Shaughnessy, played by Mary Astor. When she finally drops the BS, it's Bridget O'Shaughnessy.
Okay.
A rough name for a rough woman. And I would love to talk about her too, because I think you'll be very interested to hear that they ended up on this film with exactly the right actress for this role due to what she had gone through in her own personal life.
Oh, wow. Was there an intimate connection there with that and her kind of being called to the role, or something else?
So get this, in the 1930s, Mary Astor had already been established as a teenager as a silent film actress. But she, in the 1930s, had been at the center of one of the biggest scandals to that point in Hollywood history, because she had been caught by her husband having an affair with playwright George S. Kaufman, and had widely publicized her diary that she had kept about the affair, which, when it got to the press, they exposed all of the lurid sexual details that she had put in this diary about the affair, and her divorce proceedings were so widely publicized that Samuel Goldwyn, who was her boss at the time at MGM, was urged by the public to try and fire her over her morality clause in her contract, even though he decided not to do that and allowed her to star at the time alongside, believe it or not, Walter Houston in the film Dodsworth. Astor's brush with controversy and with being the, almost the Kim Kardashian of her era in the way that she was made the center of a controversy and that defined her as a person in the public eye, that allowed her in the Maltese Falcon to kind of play this role as a parody of her own personal struggles.
I love getting that context. And I think it's super important that you bring that up because obviously modern acting was kind of established at that time. But what I'd like to label as noir acting as a kind of subset was very, very unique. I really think it's a transitionary period to early method acting there, taking those real life experiences, finding a connection to the character and its motivations through the scenes and throughout the script became more and more important. People wanted to see on screen real performances. Acting previous to that felt over the top. It felt cheesy. It didn't feel realistic. And noir films, they bring you in even further than that. They're the most realistic cut, or at least supposed to be a very raw lens into the human experience. And I feel like with Miss O'Shaughnessy as a character, Mary Astor did her thing. And seeing that she tapped into personal experience makes so much sense and kind of puts her at the forefront of being some of these actors who are really changing the game of acting at the time. And what makes her so awesome and what makes the film so cool is if you're unaware of the plot and the mystery going into it, it's very easy to feel that someone is acting and that someone being Miss O'Shaughnessy, which is a very important plot point, that she is pretending to be someone else and that she is putting on acts and airs often through the portrayal of this character. And I think what's so cool is she adapts both of those acting styles. She takes the traditional angle and shows kind of theatrically how she would have expressed herself in the character when she's playing Ruth, and big gestures and playing the ideal woman and walking around extra elegantly. But when she reveals her true colors and plays a more real and believable character, you kind of get to see the new form of acting there. And I think that's what makes this film and its representation for the transition of acting at the time extremely important, because you get to see that in juxtaposition with itself in nearly every scene she's in. And I'm kind of obsessed with her, Jack.
I mean, what a window into the soul she provides in this role. I hate to use a cliche like that, but it's really apt for Astor's performance in this. She just has this way, particularly with, and we should get into this a little bit, with her facial expressions. She has this way of going from that, as Spade would put it, doe-eyed schoolgirl act, to being the most conniving and dangerous woman you've ever seen, to being desperately panicked and afraid. And she can do it through facial expressions at a moment's notice. And it's a brilliance that she brings to the role that, in a film with lesser actors around her, might stand out for how strong it is. But if anything, what she's doing facially and what she's bringing to acting, those sort of early method, those sort of Stella Adler affectations to what she's doing, it's matched on the screen by Humphrey Bogart as Spade. I mean, his faces in this film are phenomenal, BK. I'm obsessed with the way that this man can take this snappy detective, almost cliche to modernized dialogue, and through subtle use of his face, turn it into the most gripping drama you've ever witnessed.
Wow. I love how it was Humphrey's faces for you, because I agree with you for Mary Astor and her faces and her character. I think it was necessary to see the internal battle that she's going through for the plot so the viewer can kind of get in on it. With Sam, for me, it's the way he spoke. It was the way he delivered the dialogue that hit me. But now that you mention, I need to go back and look at his faces, because the way he talked had me in it. He had me hanging on to his every word.
I mean, to be fair, when you've got a line that's cold as, I hope they don't hang you by that pretty neck, but if they do, I'll always remember you. Like, oh, that sticks with you.
Yeah, it's clearly he's a power actor. It is in tandem, but for me what connected was the way of speech, the way they talked, the vernacular. Obviously it was supposed to be of the time, but there's a cadence to it. There's a rhythm to it. You feel that it's supposed to be a raw cut from the city that they're in. It feels believable, its tempo and its pacing and its delivery. There's no moment that isn't with purpose, I feel. And we're in an era of film where a lot of time there is a lot of talking with nothing happening, or a lot of dialogue. You could fall in and out of sleep. You have to hear what's happening in this film. And I think that's why it's so important. And Sam Spade, the character, is really at the forefront of the story. He is your lens to the film. And Humphrey Bogart just becomes that character. And that was a thing of the time. It wasn't necessarily method acting yet, that you would get this character type and become that character, be that character for days on end, walk like that character even when you're not on set. We weren't there yet. But what was happening was the characters that were written were often becoming the actors that played them, or like some sort of osmosis of the two. So like, correct me if I'm wrong, but when you think Humphrey Bogart, you think of characters like Sam Spade, like they're him and he is them.
I mean, you either think with Humphrey Bogart of Sam Spade first, or you think of Rick in Casablanca. There really are no other actors like that other than, maybe Harrison Ford, who have two iconic roles that you immediately just split your attention between like that. And it's just such a great thing that, honestly, that this happened to Bogart, that he got this role in Maltese Falcon and got to really break out, because even though High Sierra had made him a bit of a name, he was kind of still living as a B player who only got to portray villains. And this was the first time he'd ever gotten to step out on his own as a hero. And honestly, not only does he kind of define the film noir hero, he's really, as Sam Spade, cinema's first great anti-hero. He's not a nice guy. When he does the right thing, he's conflicted about it because he doesn't feel like it's right, because he's giving up things that he selfishly wants. He wants to be in love with Miss O'Shaughnessy. He wants to preserve this romance that he develops with her over the course of the film, but he's got to send her down the river because it's the right thing to do. So even in this moment where he could have the stereotypical hero gets the girl ending, they've hoodwinked the police, the killers get away, he has to stand up and do the right thing and brutalize several people's worlds because they've run afoul of the law, and he is, at the end of the day, a detective, and he has its code. And to see Bogart get to envelop this role with so much complexity, it's no wonder it made the man. And it's such a great gift that we were given to have the influence of this film spin his career out into something truly special.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I think we also have to shine a light on some of the other amazing actors that were in this film, because, to be honest, there would be no murder mystery if there weren't the key components at play in this convoluted, flippin' plot. I was so confused when I first started watching. I was like, what are they talking about? A bird? Again, still couldn't get in my head that it was an artifact. It becomes important because when other crucial pieces end up being in play, you really get to meet some awesome characters that, again, were casted really well, in my opinion.
Oh, when we want to talk about people that this film launched, look no further than Casper Gutman, the Fat Man, played by Sidney Greenstreet. This is the role that Houston struggled with the most in the film, because you need this, huge, imposing man to play the role. So on the suggestion of producer Hal Willis, while he's struggling with this, Houston screen tested stage actor Sidney Greenstreet, who was 61 at the time and between 280 and 320 pounds, depending on which periodical you believe. But Houston was so enamored with Greenstreet's presence and delivery that he offers him the role. And it's that presence and delivery that makes him so intimidating as a principal villain. When you see him talking on frame, he is the frame. He becomes this visceral center of attention. And even though he is delivering some very long-winded dialogue that in lesser hands would probably come across as fairly boring, you could listen to Sidney Greenstreet talk for 4 hours and be gripped by every word this man says.
Oh, yeah. I loved him. I'm a big villain girl, so I feel like once they introduced the fat man, I was like, oh, it's on and popping now. We're gonna get to the root of the problem. And really, I feel like that's where the film starts to kind of kick off into its final act there and take you through a whirlwind of emotions and full circle in themes, if I'm being honest. A lot of the film I was kind of constantly wondering, what's the point? Why are we doing these things? What's the motivation? We've proven that our one narrator who brought us into this story, Miss O'Shaughnessy, has lied. What means she'll ever tell the truth? The viewer is just as lost as Spade is when you're watching it for the first time. So I'm curious how much intention there was there in the motivations of the characters and how they were portrayed and the themes and the critical kind of lens that the film takes from your perspective, Jack.
Well, I think one of the things that is interesting about the character motivations comes from a crucial piece of context in Dashiell Hammett's life, the author of the original novel. You see, Hammett had actually worked in advertising in the jewelry business while writing novels before the Depression. So even though he had this brief stint, he had developed this perspective that material wealth, the gaudy wealth of jewels and, wealth that is depicted through audacity, that it really doesn't mean much and it's not really worth a whole lot at the end of the day. And what makes that stuff worth anything is the greed and desperation that people have in getting their hands on that jewel or on that artifact. And so that avaricious nature that people have, and the avaricious nature that you see played out in the final scenes of the Maltese Falcon, when it appears that this relic is actually within reach of the characters, that's when you really see that this whole thing has just been about the hunt for wealth. It's even played out visually in some crucial details in the blocking. If you noticed in the film, the only times Gutman ever physically moves, when he's not in a chair just observing things, it's when he's talking about the Falcon. He changes couches to talk in detail about the Falcon to Spade. He gets up and runs out the door practically when it becomes clear that the real Falcon may still be in Istanbul. You see the hunt for wealth played out and displayed in the way these characters act in just very, very subtle and interesting ways here.
I love that you bring that up because I feel like I saw that in the character Cairo as well, with how it always turned violent with him when it was with the Falcon, and how even in his pursuit for it is as serious as he approached the negotiations. It always was relentless, even when Cairo's disarmed and should have respected the situation, still went right back to it to be like, yo, but give me the Falcon. Like, there was no hesitation.
And I think that Peter Lorre's mannerisms really helped him play up the desperation aspects of this hunt for wealth and really display them far better than any other performance did. And he did it in very subtle ways that you have pointed out. But he also did all of this in a way that is charming, that is disarming despite the hostility and despite the violence. He is a uniquely gripping character because you see how invested he is in this struggle and how, despite the fact that he's playing the characters very effete, he's a very serious man and he's very involved in the drama. And it's interesting to see that juxtaposition and the way that the desperation ultimately makes a fool out of him repeatedly.
I love that. And I feel like it extends to even, again, I don't know her name, but the secretary as well. Again, I can't stress the women in this film and their agency. Like, they were active players, the major crucial points in the film. I mean, Homegirl, it is a woman who is trusted with the artifact itself at the very end there to even bring it, to cover up their bases, to make the decision to go forth and investigate when we feel like we've reached the point where we should stop. I love being able to see that. And then bringing us to the femme fatale, which is a big trope in noir. I've loved seeing that. I should have known. Again, I hate myself for three now. I should have known that the woman wasn't going to be the good guy. I should have known. That is like the thing here. So for me, it was a gentle twist, the unveiling, the peeling back the layers to kind of find out that really Miss O'Shaughnessy has been the master manipulator behind this. It has been her moving these pieces and her getting people to do the work for her for a very long time, her taking control over all of these situations and her being in power, even when it seems like she isn't. It's by her choice and her tactic to get through this very intriguing mystery. And I feel like that drew me in when we started seeing those scenes play out between the main two characters, Miss O'Shaughnessy and Spade.
I think it's very interesting. You mentioned how much agency the women have in this film. And I think it's important to note that they pursue having agency in very different ways that gives them all unique credit for being different individuals rather than having them all in the same kind of cookie cutter archetype. For example, the secretary you mentioned, Effie, she has agency in the world through being every bit the wit that Sam Spade is, and through helping him along in his mysteries, and through being that steadfast and trustworthy presence. By the same token, you see Miss O'Shaughnessy as bad not just because she does evil things, but because of the fact that she finds the way to get what she wants to be using the art of seduction and acting as a tool. And the way that playing at being a sweet person rather than being earnest and kind really allows you to see in the final scenes as she is unraveling when it becomes clear she's going to be sent down, that it really gives you a lens into who she truly is throughout the film if you're paying attention.
It's a great unravel. Like I said, it's peeling the layers back there with that character. And I love that you brought that out, the art of seduction as tools. It's also used by our home guy, Mr. Spade, as well in one of the shocking scenes of the film for me. And I feel like I need to bring it up just to put a button on this because it threw me off and I got angry for a quick second and then I immediately understood its purpose. And that's the scene where Spade ends up kissing abruptly to disarm Miss O'Shaughnessy when they're talking together early on because he is very much aware that there is an act going on and he can't break through her. While I'm not fond of the physical, not really consensual physical touch, I got it and understood why it was done, and thinking about it at the time, that is actually, quite frankly, I think what a detective would have done, especially with the stakes that were being presented at the time. He didn't know if his life was on the line. I mean, his partner had just died. He needed to do whatever it took. And those motivations don't really hit until the very end of the film, where he says that line about, you know, that was my partner. You got to bring justice to your partner. You might not like the guy, but that's what you do. And hearing that and thinking about his actions and motivations throughout the film, and again, thinking about how this film is really a testament to the changing of the acting at the time, that was such a great moment to show me that it was done with purpose and not haphazardly. It was done with intention, and it was a tool of seduction. That was that physical touch. He wanted to get her to open herself up, and essentially I feel like he made her fall in love with him at the end, where she's saying, like, let's do this, and then you still don't even know, is it an act, is it the truth, where's the line, have they blurred? It's so well done, and I feel like it's got to be a testament to the characters and the creatives on this project really honing in on what they want to focus on and connecting to the themes themselves in their execution of this adaptation.
Not only that, but I think that scene is kind of crucial because it sets the standard for something that would ultimately become a blueprint, or part of the blueprint, I should say, for what film noir became afterwards. Because that rough animalistic moment almost from Spade, that non-consensual physical act that he does, clues you into the fact that at the end of the day, there are no nice people in film noir. There are no easy, happy solutions. There are people in these worlds that are going to take actions that disgust you and horrify you and offend you. And it is in service of making sure you know that these are not likable people. They may ultimately bring about justice or bring about the right result or find that way of moving forward and becoming better people, but they don't start out in this world as saintly. They are not meant to be the conquering heroes of 1930s cinema. You know, you're looking for Errol Flynn as Robin Hood. Don't look in film noir, because that's not what you're going to get. What you're going to get is a mystery thriller with so much ambiguity and that is so interesting that it can be released in 1941 to what was near universal acclaim. And it's a film, BK, that people have loved because of all the things we've been talking about for 81 years. And it has lost, in my opinion, none of its luster.
No, it's a great watch. It holds up. You have to go in and lower your guard, I feel. You have to know what you're kind of getting into. But I would recommend this film. That's what's crazy to me. And it's not a light read. I have to say it that way because it is something you need to digest, but it's also something you could be along for the ride. And again, peel back the layers on rewatches. And that's probably why it's been around for, what'd you say, 80 plus? That's in 80 plus years?
80 plus years. And I think maybe it was said best by Variety in 1941 when it came out, because their staff said of the film that it is, and I quote because these are bigger words than I would use in this order, but one of the best examples of actionful and suspenseful melodramatic storytelling in cinematic form. This was a film that became definitive in the language of cinema. The alienated amoral hero in American cinema. That's where we get it from. Maltese Falcon. The femme fatale. Thank you, Maltese Falcon. Dark urban settings. Thank you, San Francisco, for what you were in the Maltese Falcon. And the stark lighting and meaningful use of shadow. Yes, the German expressionists invented it, but film noir defined it for American audiences. It is just a monumental achievement of filmmaking, and perhaps that's why people continue to come to it.
It brings you in, and then it opens you up to a world you don't know, but you kind of do. And I feel like as someone who's never really dived into anything like this, like, I mean, this is old. I like old films. I mean, I'm also not going to talk about how while we were watching this, I didn't realize that Wizard of Oz came out in 1930s. But I don't watch old movies.
BBK, how old did you think Julie Garland was in Wizard of Oz?
I don't know. I don't know. See, and this is why. So this is why I say what I say, because most people, that's like the oldest film I could think of. Now knowing how old it is older than I thought. So I don't really watch that stuff, and I don't like slow burns. Y'all know I'm not a fan of a lot of things. I don't like mecha. I don't like period pieces. Okay, dramas are not the best for me. But Maltese Falcon brought me in. The detective angle was awesome, so good on you. But like, that's kind of what noir is. It might not be always a detective, but there's always some sort of story that needs to be unraveled, some sort of truth behind the characters and the state of the world or the state of the conflict that needs to be deciphered and expressed, and the consequences of it being deciphered. And that right there breeds for such great storytelling and great characters. And I kind of really like this. I really liked it. I'm not, all right, I have to admit it, Jack. I was going into this and I was like, I'm not going to like this. I literally went into watching it thinking this is going to be the last on the list of my favorite ones that we had done. And it's not, so.
I always say this with the old films that I select specifically for the podcast, that there is always a method to my madness with this stuff. I wanted to, and I'm very glad we got to do this week, because I absolutely wanted to dive into the roots of where modern filmmaking comes from. I think that it's something that people kind of take for granted almost. You know, we grew up in this world where old Hollywood had been expunged by the new Hollywood movement that I have so much fondness of. You know, the studios had taken back the system in the 80s and given us, you know, huge screwball comedies. And we really grew up in the 90s in the indie movement. So we were spoiled in a lot of ways coming up with the way we got to watch film develop in multiple traditions and the way that we benefited from the groundwork that had been laid. The Maltese Falcon is the groundwork. And I think that's what's so special about filmmaking, truly the iconic films of this time, is that when you really go back and look at them, you see pieces of form that are used by filmmakers to this day. You see storytelling tactics. You see character action. You see acting styles, as you pointed out with Stanislavski and Adler. You see this real progression of what would move and become the modern film industry. And having that insight is valuable because I think it makes you a more literate film viewer. And I think it gives you access to stories that you would normally not allow yourself to enjoy. And it's the best bridge I think we have between the halves of the 20th century, is that we have this one sustained art form that is carried over and developed in spite of all the world's events. And so the Maltese Falcon is a real landmark in that process.
I feel like I've learned so much. And not just on the podcast. I really have to admit, we be doing these watch parties, and sometimes they're like impromptu road screenings. And we really went on a whole sub-tangent about, parallel to what you're saying, about learning the timeline of film history and learning the growth of it and providing those stepping stones to kind of better enjoy and consume film and kind of learn about the industry. And I really enjoyed that. I think that's kind of why we like doing the podcast. I love that we get to explore films like this, stuff that I would never watch on my own. Like, honestly, I'd be like, why are you making me watch this? But I like going in with an open heart and mind, and I know there's a method to your madness. So I'm always excited to see what you've got next up your sleeve, because you've come out with some solid bangers that I initially was like, all right, I'm going to let it. Space seems adamant about it being on the list. I'm not going to fight him. I'm not going to fight him.
Well, BK, you say that, and I really do appreciate the faith that you put in me on choosing these films and putting this stuff on the schedule. But I have to ask a favor. Are you willing to come into next week with an open mind?
Why are you doing this to me?
I've been sitting on this for about 5 minutes now because you said it, and I've been feeling guilty ever since you said it. BK's just rattling off stuff she doesn't like. Oh, I don't like mechas. I don't like period pieces. And I'm like, next week we've got a period piece coming up.
No! God dang it! We can't just watch some more sci-fi, fantasy, happy action. No.
Listen. I would not pull you into this world if I did not have a good reason. And there are few better reasons to jump into a period piece than to look at 2003's Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World, directed by Peter Weir. And I gotta tell you, BK, I've been wanting to show you this one since before we put the schedule together, because in one of your streams, way back, almost a year ago at this point, someone mentioned this movie, and you mentioned that you had never seen it and didn't like period pieces. And all I heard was a challenge.
I wish you could see my face right now, Jack. I wish you could. Oh. I'm sitting here smug. I'm sitting here like eyes not even open, pouty face right now. Just like, like a kid on timeout. You really gonna make me Master and Commander? What is it? What is it about, ships or something?
It is. It is about, in general terms, it is about the early conflicts in the 19th century between the French and British navies on the high seas in the southern hemisphere. But what unfolds is a very human and very gripping action drama that actually manages to succeed in giving you great high notes of action while also really giving you reasons to care about and feel what is going on with the crew of this ship. So I know you don't like period pieces, BK, but just trust that there is a method to my madness. I gotta get a catchphrase.
Okay, well, if you're like me and listening and are very confused about this upcoming film, go watch a trailer. That's what I'm going to do to give myself a prep. I need to know what I'm signing up for. I need to get in. I need context. I'm going to immerse myself, but this might be on the bottom of the list. We're going to have to find out soon. So you have to tune in next time to hear our thoughts about it as we go off on all the things. So I'm actually really excited, Jack. I love it when you challenge me and my limitations.
Listen, I'm just shooting for pleasantly surprised. If I get pleasantly surprised, I'll be happy.
Well, that's right. I mean, you can also see our reactions. We are going to be sharing a lot of these viewings with our community as we end out the season. So please be on the lookout for that. If you're in my personal Discord, that's where you can get all the details first. But we also are on Twitter at RFN_podcast and on Instagram at Revenge of the Film Nerds. We're going to be kicking it up again. It's 2023, so we're trying to do some cool things this year. And why not end a season with sharing some of the films with y'all? So if you're into that and you want to watch and get my live reactions to some of these, highly recommend you come through. We have some really, really fun vibes. And Jack's commentary and fun facts are mwah, chef's kiss.
It's been a lot of fun doing that stuff with your community. And I will say this, is just because the season's coming to an end, it doesn't mean you're not going to hear from the film nerds for a while. We're still going to put things out here and there. We just might be giving ourselves a little bit more breathing space until we get really into it back in season 3 during the summer of this year. So we still have some goodies coming for you guys. Do not worry. It's not 4 episodes and then see you in August. We've got stuff coming. But you're just going to have to wait and see what those surprises are going to be.
Oh, yeah. We are cooking up some fun things. Switching it up, you know. Look, me, I like to have variety in my life. I like to keep it spicy, and I also like to give that space. Mental health is very important for us. So we've been working on some cool things there to give us some fun content to y'all listeners and film nerds out there who like to stick with us, because we've been building up an epic season 3. Y'all are not going to want to miss that.
Until we get there and until we get to the end of season 2, I think we're going to need to call it a day, BK.
Boo! I always hate leaving. This sucks.
It sucks, but honestly, it's our listeners, they've got stuff to do. They have other things they want to focus on. We have to.
Yeah, why are you still listening? Do some chores. Stop. Get out. Why are you still here?
Listen, we have to leave the stuff that dreams are made of behind, and we have to move on.
Yes. Go and watch the Maltese Falcon and tell us how you feel about it. I want to know how you feel. Take the plunge. Watch something black and white. All right, do it. It's a oldie but a goodie, and you might like it. But until then, we'll see you around here on the Film Nerds. Thanks for listening.
Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.